Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to our presentation number 2 this afternoon. This presentation is in relation to the proposed special rate variation that Council, in principle, has made a decision to implement as of 2024-25. First of all, I would like to acknowledge the Wiradjuri people as the traditional owners and custodians of the land and waters, and their deep knowledge embedded within the Aboriginal community. And Council further pays respect to the local Wiradjuri elders, past, present and emerging. Before I get into some of the detail in regard to the special rate variation proposal, I'd like to just touch on the last decade of Council's operations to put the whole scene into some context. So looking back to 2011, at that point in 2011, Council's reserves were at a very low level, in total $14 million. The annual operating results for Council were deteriorating, and urgent action needed to be taken to arrest the situation. Council response was in several components. First of all, Council undertook an organisational restructure. That was a very difficult process, especially for the Council staff. And again, I wish to thank the Council staff for the very responsible way in which they dealt with and handled that difficult process. At the end of the day, that restructure resulted in a $2 million per annum saving to Council's cost base. In addition to that restructure, Council identified operational efficiencies, including addressing leave entitlements, overtime, and implementing a safe work culture within the organisation. Those efficiencies and priorities resulted in additional savings for Council beyond the $2 million per annum that I've mentioned earlier. In addition to the cost side of the ledger, Council also identified an alternative revenue stream. And that alternative revenue stream did not involve additional cost to the ratepayer. It was an innovative opportunity for Council to realise some water that it has in its portfolio, but to maximise the economic output for that water portfolio on an annual basis and return some economic dividends to the public in general. The result of all of those initiatives resulted in annual operating surpluses for the last decade, which Council is very proud of. The end result of all of that was that Council's reserves have increased from $14 million, which I mentioned earlier, to a balance of $66 million that's currently on Council's books. I mentioned during the budget presentation that $66 million has been set aside for various purposes, including reserves for our water fund and our sewer fund, our leave entitlements, our developer contributions, and other specific reasons, especially in relation to capital asset replacement and maintenance. So there is a reason for those reserve funds, and they shouldn't be used to subsidise operational expenditure of Council. During that decade, Council has also provided a host of additional facilities for the community. And I'll be touching on those in a moment, because I do believe it's important that as we lead into the discussion for a special rate variation, that we do put before you some objective information to show that there has been some great facilities put in place over the last decade. The third dot point I'd like to make in relation initially to the special rate variation proposal. It is really key for the local government authority of which we deliver services on behalf of you all, is the council has the capacity to take opportunities as they present themselves and to be innovative in the way that we leverage the energy and resources of others to get maximum benefit for the community. By retaining a financially sustainable council, that doesn't mean that council will spend haphazardly, but it will mean that it can take considered, well thought through, but important decisions that provide additional and great services and facilities. I know there's a lot of words on this screen, this next screen and the following screen, but I do want to touch on some of the fantastic facilities that Griffith now has. And I do want to emphasise as well that council did not do this on its own. Council was very well supported by the New South Wales government and also the federal government, and also some not-for-profit organisations as well, in securing these assets and additional service facilities for our city. St Vincent's Private Hospital is in place. There's a $250 million base hospital under construction as we speak. In early 2025, St Vincent's Hospital and the base hospital will connect, physically connect, so that the best healthcare services in regional New South Wales will be right here in Griffith. We have a Griffith Regional Sports Centre now that is opened. It was opened by the Prime Minister in late 2022. And that's a fantastic facility. A new 50-metre pool, affordable housing project that I've mentioned earlier, the Griffin Green Affordable Housing Project, the upgrade of the CBD, particularly Yamble Street, but also Kuya Street, significant flood mitigation infrastructure, the Griffith Industrial Link Road, essentially the northern and southern bypasses, and several other road upgrades, shared pathways, including pedestrian bridges, 2 new car parks in the city, Jubilee Oval amenities block, new playground equipment, 2 community outdoor performance stages that have already been used on several occasions, a renovation to the Griffith Regional Theatre, upgrade to that theatre, the Lake Wyingan Water Circulation Project, which is currently in operation, just recently been finalised, and it's taking water out of the Lake Wyingan South Lake as we speak. A new skate park and pump track, CBD festive lighting, event activation infrastructure involving kiosks, seating, lighting and sound equipment, and a host of additional CCTV cameras in the city. Excuse me for going through that lengthy list, but I think it's important to put those things forward before I get into the difficult conversation ahead. The current status of our operational general fund is deteriorating and is unsustainable. The truth of it is that our revenue stream is not keeping up with inflationary costs, cost shifting by the state government in particular, and diminishing operating grant funds. In addition to that, Council really does need to and want to, for the good of the city, to maintain existing service levels for our community. There is so much energy and vitality and goodwill in our community. It's such a wonderful place to live. And it's important that we retain that pride and those services for you all to enjoy. Council also has on its books now an asset or fixed asset value of over $1 billion. That's a lot of assets, and over time those assets need to be replaced or maintained. And that longer term vision has to be at front of mind with the council when it's setting this forward financial plan. This graph might be difficult for you to see or make out some of the detail, but I'll just point out this is a general fund graph. I've referred earlier to consolidated funds, where there's general, water and sewage funds. This just relates to the general fund, which is the area of financial vulnerability for our community. If you notice the blue line, first of all, there is a clear trend of decline in the surplus operating in that general fund. It is just about reached the point now where it's dipping into negative territory or to loss. And that deterioration will continue unless it's arrested. And Council wants to address that question, that challenge, before it gets worse. It's always going to be a difficult decision, but the time is right now for that to occur. What I will just mention as well is the red line underneath that. The red line underneath that just represents, from a legislative perspective, Council is required to separate its waste service function from other general fund functions in its financial analysis. The waste fund needs to operate under its own steam or under its own profit and loss arrangement. So if we take the surplus that the waste fund is operating under, it makes the general fund result look even more vulnerable. In terms of addressing our sustainability of the general fund, there's just one short sentence that really does need to be made, and that is, we cannot afford to kick the can down the road. I know it's difficult. I know the community, the mayor, the councillors have the community at the front of their minds. But we have investigated the finances of our council carefully, and an additional revenue stream is needed. And we need to start sooner rather than later. Council has already anticipated that we also need to find some savings in terms of our operational costs. So when you look at the budget in some detail, if you have time, you will notice that each of the years going forward, we've included a line item of $1 million per year in operational savings. That is a commitment that the council, myself as general manager and directors, are committed to finding each year to moderate the impact of a special rate variation on the community. So council essentially has two options. The first option is for a special rate variation to be implemented, plus the annual operational savings that I've just spoken about. Secondly, an alternative option, is a reduction of services, but also the annual operational savings, of course, that I've mentioned before. Option 2 is a very, very difficult process to go through, and council believes that in the long run, this community deserves better than having their services reduced. I'd like to provide a bit of information or background in terms of what a special variation is or what it means. All councils in New South Wales can only increase rate revenue by a percentage or a maximum percentage set by the Independent Pricing and Regulatory Tribunal each year, or IPART. This is known as the rate peg. And for 2023-24 year, that's the upcoming budget, that is set at 3.7%. Council will run its budget for the 2023-24 year based on a rate increase of 3.7%. There will be no special rate variation impact during that year, our next year. If council decides to increase rate revenue above the rate peg, then they must apply to IPART for an SRV, or special rate variation. If IPART approves that, the SRV will not take effect until July 2024. In other words, not until a further 12 months occurs. Why we need to consider a special rate variation from 24-25 onwards. As I've mentioned earlier, our general fund projections clearly demonstrate that that fund is financially unsustainable. And to put that unsustainability into cold dollars, our 23-24 budget for the general fund demonstrates a deficit of 3.65 million. And if we exclude the waste fund that I referred to when referring to the graph earlier, that deficit is 4.94 million. In more detail, Council proposes that the SRV would be implemented through 3 steps. The first step would be in the 24-25 financial year. And I'll emphasise again, that's not the year that we're about to enter into. It is from 12 months' time. That increase would be 10.5% increase. But I emphasise that that 10.5% increase includes whatever the rate pegging limit is for that year as determined by IPART. We are assuming that the rate peg will be 3%. So from the community perspective, that would mean a 7.5% special rate variation increase in addition to the rate peg of 3%. Steps 2 and 3, or stages 2 and 3, are identical to what I've just mentioned, but in the following years, the following 2 years of 25, 26 and 26, 27. The councillors have thought long and hard about this and felt that by staging the increase over 3 years gives the community the opportunity to better manage that increase rather than bring in all at one point. I would just like to give you some indication of comparison of the impact in dollar terms of the special rate variation increases in the various land use categories that we have for rating purposes. The first one I'll show you is residential. And what I have identified here is just to compare our residential average rate, and I emphasise average rate, with our peer cities in the Riverina area of New South Wales, being Albury and Wagga. I'll leave you to interpret the results that you see on the screen. But what I will say is, if you look at the starting point on the left-hand column, the 23-24 3.7% rate peg column, you will notice that the Griffith residential rate, average rate, is very competitive compared to the other 2 cities. If you go to the far right column, after the final stage of the rate peg is implemented, you will note that the Griffith average rate, and I emphasise average, is still in the middle of those 2 other cities. What I would also like to mention, if you look at the bottom of the screen, is that of the 128 councils in New South Wales, 90 of those councils have already implemented and had approved a special rate variation by IPART during the last decade. This is a similar table for our counterparts in the Riverina area, Griffith, Albury, Wagga, but for the business rate. Again, you can draw your own conclusions from those indicative average rates. From a business rate perspective, Griffith City Council, on the base of those average rates, are competitive and will remain competitive even after the special rate variation is implemented. Finally, the farmland rate. It is acknowledged that the farmland rate, if I look at the right-hand side column, the indicative average rate for farmland will be higher than the other two cities in Riverina. What is worth mentioning, though, is that there is somewhat a unique circumstance where the farmland, or majority of farmland in Griffith, is irrigable. Most of the farmland in the other cities is not, and one can draw your own conclusion as to whether that has an influence on the various valuations and rate levels that come out of those that category. But I'll leave it to you to make up your own mind. This slide just touches on, if you like, the timeline or dates, key steps that are required for council to progress the special rate variation process. Council has already resolved, as I mentioned earlier, at the 9th of May meeting, in principle, to apply for an SRV to IPART. We're now commencing the community consultation process regarding this, and this process will not be 1 month, it will be for several months. I'll outline earlier how council, I'll outline in a moment the steps the council will take, but it is several months involved in this consultation. In October, council will hold another meeting to consider all of the community feedback in relation to this, and will resolve either to apply or not to apply to IPART for the SRV. In January next year, the deadline for the application to IPART must be in by council, if it so resolves to do so. During February, IPART will undertake community consultation in its own right to cross-check on the community consultation that Griffith City Council has undertaken. And in May next year, 2024, IPART will determine as to whether to approve the SRV or not. In terms of the community consultation process, this is just the start of it. Council is committed to getting out and discussing this with as many groups in the community as we need to in order to give everyone the opportunity for feedback. The first opportunity will be the Community Opinion Group meeting, or the COG meeting, which will be held on the 6th of June at the Ugali Club, commencing at 7 p.m, Tuesday the 6th of June. The Mayor and I are also committed to attending any number of community and business group meetings in order to provide more information and also to receive feedback. And I've mentioned several groups there on the slide, but certainly they are not limited to the number of forums or that we will attend. Council also holds a council cafe every month. There'll be opportunity for everyone to have input at that point, during those council cafes. We also have the website. There'll be plenty of information on there and the opportunity to make submissions. Council social media and newsletters will put further information out for the community. Thank you everybody for joining us for the special rate variation presentation this afternoon. This will be a difficult discussion, but in my view as General Manager, it's a necessary discussion to be had. And I hope the community will support Council's decision in principle to make an application for an SRV to set this city back on a sustainable future financially to continue to provide great services. Thank you.